Have you ever wondered how a small island nation just 90 miles off the coast of Florida could become a major player on the world stage, defying a superpower for over 60 years? The story of the Cuban Revolution is a dramatic tale of inequality, rebellion, and ideology that reshaped a nation and sent shockwaves across the globe. Let's dive into the turbulent history of how Cuba was forever changed. To understand the revolution, we first have to look at pre-revolutionary Cuba. In the early 20th century, after gaining independence from Spain, Cuba quickly fell under the significant economic and political influence of the United States. The Platt Amendment, for instance, gave the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuban affairs, a power it used multiple times. By the 1950s, American companies dominated the Cuban economy, owning vast sugar plantations, cattle ranches, mines, and utilities. Havana was a glamorous playground for wealthy Americans and a hub for organized crime, famously depicted in films like The Godfather Part 2. While the city glittered with casinos, nightclubs, and luxury hotels, this prosperity was not shared by all. Beneath the surface of this vibrant nightlife, deep social and economic problems were festering. The majority of Cubans, especially in rural areas, lived in extreme poverty. They worked seasonally on sugar plantations for meager wages, with little access to education or health care. Land ownership was concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy elites and foreign corporations. This stark contrast between the extravagant wealth in Havana and the widespread poverty in the countryside created a powder keg of social unrest. It was a society ripe for change. The political situation was just as unstable. In 1952, General Fulgencio Batista, who had previously served as president, seized power in a military coup just before an election he was expected to lose. His regime became notorious for its corruption, brutality, and close ties to American business interests and organized crime. Batista suppressed political dissent, using his secret police to torture and eliminate opponents. The Cuban people were left feeling powerless, their democratic rights stripped away. This oppressive environment set the stage for the rise of a young, charismatic lawyer who would soon lead the charge against Batista, Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro first burst onto the political scene on July 26, 1953. He led a group of about 120 rebels in an audacious attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. The plan was to seize weapons and spark a nationwide uprising. However, the attack was a disastrous failure. The rebels were vastly outnumbered, and most were either killed in the fighting or captured and executed afterward. Castro himself was captured and put on trial. But it was at this trial that Castro turned his military defeat into a political victory. Representing himself, he delivered a now famous 4-hour speech, ending with the defiant words, "Condemn me. It does not matter. History will absolve me." In this speech, he outlined his vision for a new Cuba, land reform, an end to corruption, and national sovereignty. The speech was smuggled out of prison, printed, and circulated among the Cuban people, becoming the manifesto of his revolutionary movement, which became known as the 26th of July movement. Though sentenced to 15 years in prison, Castro was released after just 2 years due to a public amnesty. His spirit, however, was far from broken. After his release, Castro went into exile in Mexico. It was there that he met a key figure who would become an icon of revolution worldwide, an Argentine doctor named Ernesto Che Guevara. Guevara was a fervent Marxist who believed that armed struggle was the only way to liberate Latin America from imperialist control and social injustice. He and Castro shared a common vision, and Che quickly became a crucial part of the revolutionary inner circle, serving as a military strategist and ideological mentor. Together with Fidel's brother, Raul Castro, and a small band of 82 rebels, they began to plan their return to Cuba. In December 1956, These 82 revolutionaries, known as the Granma Expeditionaries, set sail from Mexico aboard a small, leaky yacht called the Granma. Their journey was plagued by bad weather and engine trouble, and they landed 2 days late and in the wrong location. They were quickly ambushed by Batista's army. Only a handful of the rebels, including Fidel, Raul, and Sietchi, managed to escape the initial onslaught. It seemed like the revolution was over before it had even truly begun. The few survivors fled into the rugged terrain of the Sierra Maestra Mountains. This remote, inaccessible region would become their sanctuary and the headquarters of their guerrilla war. From here, they began to regroup. The rebels focused on winning the hearts and minds of the local peasant population. They offered medical care, taught people to read and write, and promised them land reform. They treated the peasants with respect, a stark contrast to the brutality of Batista's soldiers, who often terrorized rural communities. This strategy was incredibly effective. The peasantry began to support the rebels, providing them with food, shelter, and crucial intelligence. The small band of survivors slowly grew into a disciplined guerrilla army. Meanwhile, in the cities, an underground resistance movement was also gaining momentum. Students, workers, and intellectuals organized strikes, acts of sabotage, and propaganda campaigns to undermine Batista's regime. The government responded with even greater repression, further alienating the population and driving more people to support Castro's cause. The rebels' message, broadcast from their clandestine radio station, Radio Rebelled, spread throughout the island, inspiring hope and resistance. The turning point came in the summer of 1958. Batista, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all, launched a massive military offensive called Operation Verano. He sent thousands of soldiers into the Sierra Maestra. But the government's army was poorly led, demoralized, and unfamiliar with the mountainous terrain. The rebels, using their knowledge of the land and classic guerrilla tactics, hit and-run raids, ambushes, and strategic retreats, inflicted a series of humiliating defeats on Batista's forces. This victory was a huge morale booster for the rebels and a devastating blow to the regime. It proved that Batista's army was not invincible. After a series of successful campaigns led by Sietchi Guevara and another commander, Camilo Cienfuegos, the rebel forces began to advance out of the mountains and across the island. The decisive battle took place in the city of Santa Clara. In late December 1958, Sietchi Guevara's column attacked the city, derailing an armored train full of government troops and weapons. The capture of Santa Clara effectively cut the island in two and signaled the end for Batista's regime. Seeing that the fight was lost and that his American allies were withdrawing their support, Fulgencio Batista fled Cuba on New Year's Eve, January 1, 1959. The news of Batista's flight sparked spontaneous celebrations across the country. The revolution had triumphed. Fidel Castro and his victorious rebel army began a triumphant march across the island, arriving in Havana on January 8, 1959, to a hero's welcome. Hundreds of thousands of Cubans flooded the streets to celebrate what they hoped would be the dawn of a new era of freedom, justice, and prosperity. The early days of the new government were filled with radical changes. Castro's government quickly implemented its promises, most notably the Agrarian Reform Law, which broke up large estates and redistributed land to peasants and cooperatives. They launched a massive literacy campaign that dramatically reduced illiteracy in just 1 year. New schools and hospitals were built, making education and healthcare accessible to all Cubans for the first time. However, these reforms, particularly the expropriation of land and businesses owned by American corporations, set Cuba on a collision course with the United States. As Castro's government moved further to the left, embracing socialist policies and forging close ties with the Soviet Union, relations with the U.S. deteriorated rapidly. The US imposed a trade embargo, which remains largely in place to this day. In 1961, the CIA sponsored the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, an attempt by Cuban exiles to overthrow Castro, which failed spectacularly and only strengthened his position. The following year, the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the discovery of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba brought the superpowers to the brink of nuclear war. The Cuban Revolution is a complex and controversial event. For some, it represents a heroic struggle for national liberation and social justice, a model for how a small nation can stand up to a superpower. For others, it was the beginning of a totalitarian regime that suppressed dissent, violated human rights, and ruined the nation's economy. But what is undeniable is its profound and lasting impact. It transformed Cuban society, reshaped Cold War politics, and created a legacy that continues to be debated and felt around the world today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of the most pivotal events of the 20th century. What are your thoughts on the Cuban Revolution? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about fascinating moments in history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.